Hello and welcome to this episode of Foresight. In today's episode, I'll talk about antitrust litigation against the technology industry is one of the largest providers, Google. Over 50 states in the United States are suing Google for antitrust litigation and breaking the laws of fair competition. In addition, 3 private industry groups have also sued Google for unfair competitive practices. How serious is this for the technology sector, for Google, and what message is this sending out? What's the future? What can really happen through this litigation? In today's episode, we understand what antitrust litigation is, why Google, why now, and the future. This is Foresight, and I'm your host, Ian Khan. Last week, antitrust litigation against Google has led to over 50 attorneys general from across the US to file 3 different lawsuits against Google. The accusation in these lawsuits is that Google has broken antitrust laws, which essentially means Google is not helping create a fair industry. It is trying to stop other competitors from taking over its market share, and essentially doing things that have been highlighted in these antitrust law cases in the US. So what are antitrust laws and when did they come in place? Antitrust laws are regulations that encourage competition by limiting the market power of any particular firm. This often involves ensuring that mergers and acquisitions don't overly concentrate market power or form monopolies, as well as breaking up firms that have become monopolies, that have become too big and control a majority stake in the marketplace. Antitrust laws also prevent multiple firms from coming together, colluding to form a cartel to limit competition through practices such as price fixing. Due to the complexity of deciding what practices will limit competition, antitrust law has become very important and a very distinct legal specialization. Let's look at more details about how antitrust laws came into being. The Sherman Act, the Federal Trade Commission Act, and the Clayton Act are the foundational pillars that set the groundwork for antitrust regulation. In 1887, the US Congress passed the Interstate Commerce Act, which was designed to deregulate the railways because they are becoming too powerful, asking railroads to charge a fair fee to passengers and to publicly post those fares where everyone could see them. What did this do? It created transparency, and this was the beginning of antitrust. This is an example of, in fact, the first such usage, which was followed by the Sherman Act in 1890. The Sherman Act said it outlawed contracts and conspiracies restraining trade or monopolizing industries. For example, the Sherman Act said that competing individuals or businesses cannot fix prices or divide markets or attempt to rig bids. And the Sherman Act laid out specific penalties and fines for violating these terms. In 1914, Congress passed the Federal Trade Commission Act, which banned unfair competition methods, deceptive acts, or practices. And the Clayton Act was also passed in 1914, which addressed specific practices the Sherman Act did not ban. For example, the Clayton Act prohibited appointing the same person to make business decisions for competing organizations. Now, Google fines for antitrust to date, because these multiple cases have been ongoing with Google, the fines that Google has amassed until now is more than $8 billion so far, and this is relating to Google AdSense, their Android platform, Google Search, and the $8 billion was a collective settlement of a landmark case in Europe where the European Commission opened a formal investigation into Google's algorithm. Other companies, such as Microsoft, have been fined in millions. Microsoft paid about 497 million euros, the largest fine that EU had handed over at that time, and in addition to other penalties, which included 120 days to divulge server information, 90 days to produce a version of Windows without Windows Media Player, and so on. And in fact, Europe has levied about $2.1 billion in antitrust fines in 3 separate lawsuits for various abuses on Microsoft of its market position. Let's talk about Facebook. Well, they've not been playing well as we know. And in fact, in 2019, the FTC slapped a record fine of $5 billion on Facebook for their probe following the Cambridge Analytica scandal. The fine was the largest ever imposed on a company for violating consumer privacy, said the FTC. Amazon, Apple, Google, Facebook are all currently subject to antitrust hearings. Earlier in January 2020, the CEOs of 4 smaller companies, in fact, provided their testimonies at public hearings and talked about how big tech is disrupting not just their business, but entire industry sectors, which is not even the primary domain of these large providers. Complaints against tech giants included, and I quote this from the Walks, things such as tech giants use their power in one market to crush competitors in another market. Tech giants have so much power that fair business negotiations are impossible. Big tech companies infringe on small competitor patents because now they'll control the market by the time they have to pay up tomorrow. Big tech companies prioritize monopoly rent over the best interest of business partners and consumers. Tech giants are both participants in and the owners of their platform, and so they tilt the playing field in their direction. The online dossiers that Facebook and Google have amassed on their users gives them too much power. The question is, are these accusations real? What do lawmakers need to do to hold big tech responsible? And I say this because in the last few hearings, big tech CEOs, including Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google, as well as Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Facebook, were able to give answers that didn't make sense. And I personally thought they were eluding the US Congress during their testimonies, which were held over the past year or so. Let's play some of those clips and really watch some of these answers and see what to make sense of them. Here are some clips.
We are proud of our employees.
Your head of multicultural marketing said you were pushing to get out the Latino vote, paying for a ride to the polls for the Latino vote only in key states, and you're saying that's not accurate.
Yes, that's right. We haven't found any evidence to substantiate
So she just made it up out of thin air the day after the election and wrote this email to your top executives, and it's not true?
Congressman, I'm happy to follow up, but I think the employees today do their own activities.
We don't want the follow-up. I want the real answers right here in this committee.
As I said earlier, we have looked into it. We didn't find it.
Did you push to get out the key vote? And I would say the 2 most populous states for Latinos would be California and Texas. Did you push to get out the Latino vote and pay for people to go to the polls in California and Texas?
I have an iPhone, and if I move from here and go over there and sit with my Democrat friends, which will make them real nervous, does Google track my movement? Does Google, through this phone, know that I have moved here and moved over to the left? It's either yes or no.
Not by default. There may be a Google service which you've opted in to use, and if...
So Google knows that I am moving over there. It's not a trick question. You know, you make $100 million a year, you ought to be able to answer that question. Does Google know through this phone that I am moving over there and sit next to Mr. Johnson, which would make him real nervous? It's his question. It's yes or no.
I wouldn't be able to answer without looking at...
You can't say yes or no.
Without knowing more details, sir.
A significant portion of this hearing was a waste of time because the First Amendment protects private individuals and corporations' free speech rights.
Who makes the judgment calls regarding content moderation at Google?
Or the seller is allowed to sell on Amazon?
No, Congresswoman, I don't.
Okay, then I'm going to ask you, sir, will you commit to reporting all sales of stolen and counterfeit goods to law enforcement? And 2, victims to track large-scale offenders engaged in organized retail crime?
To the degree that we're aware of it, we will certainly pursue it. In fact, I would...
Sir, can you just make a blanket commitment? Can you just make a blanket commitment, whether you're aware of it or not?
A blanket commitment to what? Sorry, Congresswoman, I'm trying to be helpful.
Reporting all sales of stolen and counterfeit goods to law enforcement and to victims to track large-scale offenders engaged in organized retail crime.
I see no reason why, if we're aware of stolen goods, we wouldn't report it. We would want the correct law enforcement authorities to be involved.
Okay, thank you so much. I yield back my time.
Thank the gentlelady for yielding back. I want to thank the witnesses for their testimony today and my colleagues.
Apple is the sole decision maker as to whether an app is made available to app users through the Apple Store. Isn't that correct?
If it's a native app, yes, sir. If it's a web app, no.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And throughout our investigation, we've heard concerns that rules governing the App Store review process are not available to the app developers. The rules are made up as you go. They are arbitrarily interpreted and enforced and are subject to change whenever Apple sees fit to change. And developers have no choice but to go along with the changes, or they must leave the App Store. That's an enormous amount of power. Also, the rules get changed to benefit Apple at the expense of app developers, and the App Store is said to also discriminate between app developers with similar apps on the Apple platform, and also as to small app developers versus large app developers. So, Mr. Cook, does Apple not treat all app developers equally?
Sir, we treat every developer the same. We have open and transparent rules. It's a rigorous process. Because we care so deeply about privacy and security and quality, we do look at every app before it goes on. But those rules apply evenly to everyone. And as you can tell by going from...
Some developers are favored over others, though. Isn't that correct?
That is not correct. And as you can tell from going from just 500...
I'll give you an example. Baidu has two App Store employees assigned to help it navigate the App Store bureaucracy. Is that true?
I don't know about that, sir.
Well, you don't have other app developers who have that same access to Apple personnel, do you?
We do a lot of things with developers, including looking at their beta test apps, regardless of whether they're small or large.
Okay, well, let me ask you this question. Apple has negotiated exceptions to its typical 30% commission for some apps like Amazon Prime. Is a reduced commission such as the one that Amazon Prime gets available to other app developers?
It's available to anyone meeting the conditions, yes.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. Apple requires all app developers to use Apple's payment processing system if those developers want to sell their goods or services to Apple users through Apple's App Store. Isn't that correct?
That is correct, because it's
by processing payments for apps that you allow into the App Store, you collect their customer data and you use that data to inform Apple as to whether or not it would be profitable for Apple to launch a competing app. Isn't that correct?
Sir, 84% of the apps are charged nothing. The remaining 16% either pay 15 or 30, depending upon the specifics. If it's in the second year of a subscription, as an example, it only pays 15%. If you look back at history...
What's to stop Apple from increasing its commission to 50%?
We have...
How many data categories do you store? Does Facebook store on the categories that you collect?
Senator, can you clarify what you mean by data categories?
Well, there's some past reports that have been out there that indicate that Facebook collects about 96 data categories for those 2 billion active users. That's 192 billion data points that are being generated, I think, at any time from consumers globally. So how many does Facebook store out of that? Do you store any?
Senator, I'm not actually sure what that is referring to.
Could somebody call you up and say, I want to see John Kennedy's file?
Absolutely not.
Could you, if would you do it? Could you do it?
In theory.
Do you have the right to put my data, a name on my data, and share it with somebody?
I do not believe we have the right to do that.
Do you have the ability?
Senator, the data is in the system, so...
Do you have the ability?
Technically, I think someone could do that, but that would be a massive breach. So we would never do that.
It would be a breach.
Are you willing to change your business model in the interest of protecting individual privacy?
Congresswoman, we have made and are continuing to make changes to reduce the amount of data.
Are you willing to change your business model in the interest of protecting individual privacy?
Congresswoman, I'm not sure what that means.
If I choose to terminate my Facebook account, can I bar Facebook or any third parties from using the data that I had previously supplied for any purpose whatsoever?
Yes, Senator. If you delete your account, we should get rid of all of your information.
You should, or
we do?
Do you?
We do.
How about third parties that you have contracted with to use some of that underlying information, perhaps to target advertising for themselves? You can't. Do you claw back that information as well, or does that remain in their custody?
Well, Senator, this is actually a very important question. I'm glad you brought this up because there's a very common misperception about Facebook that we sell data to advertisers. And we do not sell data to advertisers.
Well,
we don't sell data to anyone.
You clearly rent it.
Quite a story, right? Dorm room to the global behemoth that you guys are, only in America. Would you agree with that?
Senator, mostly in America.
You couldn't do this in China, right? Or what you did in 10 years.
Well, Senator, there are some very strong Chinese internet companies.
Right, but you're supposed to answer yes to this question.
Even if Facebook doesn't earn money from selling data, doesn't Facebook earn money from advertising based on that data?
Yes, Congresswoman. We run ads. That's the business model is running ads.
How do you sustain a business model in which users don't pay for your service?
Senator, we run ads.
Here's a quick summary of what Google is facing. In the US, the Department of Justice has filed cases along with 11 Republican state attorneys general alleging Google of meddling with distribution channels. Multiple other states have joined this lawsuit as well. Republican state attorneys general, Texas led a group of 9 other Republican state attorneys general in a lawsuit alleging Google used its market power to push advertisers and publishers to use its tool across every step of the buying process, impacting consumers and the decisions that they made. Bipartisan state coalition, a bipartisan group of attorneys general from 38 states and territories, including Colorado, Iowa, Nebraska, and New York, launched a 3rd lawsuit against Google just last Thursday. Now, this lawsuit specifically covers new and emerging distribution channels such as smart speakers, and it also alleges Google limits the ability of vertical search providers like Yelp and TripAdvisor to reach consumers by using discriminatory conduct on its search result pages. This complaint also talks about Google advertising tools and states that it unfairly disadvantages other advertisers and so on and so forth. All these cases against Google are an amazing step. I think it's a very welcome step by those who were looking from the sidelines, who were talking about privacy and consumer rights for years or decades. And as it is, big tech, including Google, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, everybody has had tremendous amount of success, which is incredible. And I'm sure many of you use these products and services, and which is great. but there has to be a limitation on not the, and this is not about money, not the amount of money these companies make, not the amount of wealth their CEOs are generating, or who's on the billionaire list or no, but these lawsuits are about consumer protection. These lawsuits are about fair trade. These lawsuits are about fair business practices and really creating economies that help competition, that help give the consumer the choices that they need. And so these lawsuits are about you and me and all of us out there who are consumers of these technologies. I'm really hoping that all of these guys, they continue doing the incredible work they do. Google and Microsoft and whoever is out there, they continue building products and doing great stuff. But at the core of it is data that you and I have generated, that we have generated, their consumers have generated. And like I said before, the dossiers they have on every user, Facebook has about 5,000 different data points on a majority of its users, and that data is being used to monetize things for Facebook. And so the big question becomes that if your data is being used by Facebook for monetization, and Facebook is making money out of it, what are you getting out of that, right? That is the big question. That is where we're headed with this. And that's just another part, another side of this whole emerging awareness, these lawsuits, Congress hearings, and so on. I really believe that Congress and US lawmakers and the Justice Department and everybody who's involved from a government side in this litigation needs to do a better job at asking the right questions. I remember the first few hearings that I saw with Mark Zuckerberg being asked questions. The questions didn't really make sense, and they were. I really feel the congressmen and women had to do a better job at preparing themselves and ask really intelligent questions so that they could hold these CEOs responsible for what they're doing and get the right questions from them. We also saw some clips where CEOs were being very elusive about some answers, and it's surprising and sometimes shocking to see that a CEO of a company wouldn't know something. They wouldn't know what's happening in their organization, and they conveniently say that, well, I really don't know about this, and I got to check with my people on what is happening, or I really don't know what system or process or platform is being used within our company, and I have to go back and talk to my people. And things like that don't work. It's just BS that Congress is being fed, and I really believe CEOs need to come clean, and it's going to be challenging. It's not going to be an easy road for Congress to go through these cases. Here's my take. These cases, the antitrust litigation cases against anybody, are going to go on for years and years and years, so don't expect things to move really fast. In a world driven by Corona and COVID, we're delayed by a few years anyway. So the next 2 to 3 years should really show us some light. Maybe there's litigation that will come out of this, and maybe there'll be more stricter controls, stricter rules for organizations and companies to operate. Maybe some of the big tech will be broken down, whether it's Google being broken down into pieces, smaller organizations, or Facebook or Amazon, to create competitive markets, to create healthy marketplaces, and that is a big possibility. For now, it's interesting to see that something is happening in the right direction. Thank you for watching this video. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for watching this video. Please do consider subscribing and tell us what you think about today's story. Put your comments down below and tell us your take on big tech, antitrust litigation that's happening right now, and your opinion or where the industry should go. Thank you so much. This is Ian Khan. Take care.